Friendly Ops Talks fans, we are back with another wonderful episode of Rentley Ops Talks. We have thought leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs on the show who've built great things, and we want to help you viewers learn a little thing or two about them and how they built a success story. So really honored and happy to have someone who I think has figured it all out. Honestly, this is a man who I've personally known for a few years in the prop tech space, and he has had a wonderful career, well-versed, ops talk centric, diverse background. He was a consultant for many years. He's a thought leader in the multifamily space for sure. He also is a public servant, has served in government consulting work, served as a real estate operator and an advisor, and also is able to put on what I would consider the pinnacle trade show in multifamily, the AIM show that's actually kicking off this May. I want to introduce my friend and guest, Steve Lefkovits. Steve, it's an honor to have you here on Rentley Ops Talks.
Thank you. And just for the record, I like to think of my career as a potpourri or a smorgasbord, depending on.
Fair enough. And it's a delicious smorgasbord. And honestly, Steve, we get a lot of guests here, and we do all this prep work. Obviously, Ops Talks, it's an agile format, but I almost was struggling. How do I approach Steve? He has such a varied potpourri and beautiful smelling career, and I want to read a couple of your accomplishments. Obviously, you were a retired partner in RealtyCom Partners. For those of you that don't know, it's the multifamily housing industry's largest telecommunications consulting firm. He volunteers as the chair of technology in real estate at the Urban Land Institute. He served as a senior vice president at a publicly traded REIT. You're the vice president of finance and technology at the NMHC. I was asking myself, I'm like, where do I start with Steve?
It all starts with NMHC. Honestly, it does. How I got there is sort of emblematic of how, multifamily it was a simpler time back then. I was working for the state of New York. I was helping to finance affordable housing. And Jonathan Kempner, who was then the president of NMHC, called me and asked me to come down for an interview for this job, being the vice president of finance. And I had never been a lobbyist before, which is what the job was. But, I had a lot of confidence in myself. So I show up for the job interview. He liked me enough that he sent me to see the chair of NMHC, who was Dick Michaud, the CEO of Avalon Bay. And Dick was and is many things, including a retired naval officer. So at the conclusion of our interview, he just looks at me and goes, well, you're not qualified for this job based on experience. Because, on the other hand, the job of senior officers is to train junior officers. So if you're willing, I'll sign off on it.
Wow. So he was willing to mentor you.
Yeah. And it was a much smaller industry back then, right? My first NMHC meeting was 700 people. Dick was true to his word. A lot of his people became my people. A lot of the people who worked with him are still some of my closest friends, the people that I, do things with and go on vacation with. Avalon had recently gone public and was probably only $1 billion or $2 billion in value. It wasn't, the giant it was today. Everything was more accessible, and there were still a lot of mom and pops. The professionalization of the industry was just starting, and we'd have debates at NMHC about things. One of my favorites was, should we allow leasing agents to have computers?
All right.
So in that environment, it hasn't been hard to enjoy the industry and thrive.
A couple questions there, but what do you think about that interview led to the moment where Dick was willing to take a chance on you and mentor you? Like looking back on it, why do you think he took that chance on you?
A couple of reasons. One is they thought correctly that they could hire me inexpensively, and I think that was probably
Fair.
50%. Just being honest.
Yeah.
And I think the other part of it was that we make things more complex than they are. And lobbying is mostly storytelling. Lobbying is not playing a shadow role in government and arm twisting. And I mean, yeah, at the very highest levels it is, but for business industry lobbyists, most of what you're doing is just humanizing the industry, being available and explaining how complex things work in ways that people can understand. And, because I had a finance background and could talk about accounting and could talk about capital finance and could explain the connection between the cost of capital and the cost of building and rent,
Hmm.
There was no trouble doing the job and finding ways to connect with the decision makers that had to juggle a lot of different things. And, most of it in those days, most of being a lobbyist was being truthful and trusted. Just people know that they could call you and you tell them the truth. You could certainly talk up your own self-interest, but it wasn't that hard. And you just had to understand that this industry isn't just development. It's not just operations. It's not just the FHA programs. It's all of it put together. And I think that's probably what Dick saw was my interest in learning more about that and being able to tell those stories.
It's interesting that you say the storytelling component. Just hearing your story, you sort of were able to weave all the operational and financial elements of, hey, this is how we build housing, right? To the why. Like, why do we do what we do? What gives us meaning? And you were able to tell that story in front of Congress, the Senate, whoever, to explain, like, this is the rationale of what we do and why we're trying to grow unit count or whatever we do.
I'd say the thing that I really took a lot of joy in is I go to any industry meeting and, there's social events and there'd be the Trammel Crow guys all sitting together in the center of the room or standing together in the center of the room. And there'd be 40 or 50 Trammel Crow guys. And then there'd be 500 other people around the outer circle standing there who didn't know anybody.
Right.
And so, I'm like, okay, I've been the new guy before. So I talk to the other people at the edge of the circle and say, hey, what do you do? And go, oh, I'm from Indianapolis. Me and my brothers, we own 36,000 apartment units, and I've never been to a meeting like this before. Sir, you own 36,000 apartments? How'd you? Oh, well, my grandfather started it, and we've just been doing our thing, and we're in 11 states, and that was fantastic. Okay, and then some other guy would come up to me and go, hey, what did that guy just tell you? I'd say, oh, he said his name, and he told me he owned 36,000 apartments. The guy says, well, I provide equity to people who own apartments. Could you introduce me? And I'd say, like, well, what's equity? Now, tell me what you do. And then some other guy say, hey, I saw you talking to these other two guys. I said, well, what do you do? Well, I'm a broker and I sell portfolio. And I go, wow, you guys all really should be talking to each other. You don't even know each other. And so, it was like weaving. And I think that someone recently called me a social weaver, a professional weaver. And I think that that's really true. I really take great joy in weaving the fabric business connectedness together, and it's just inherent.
I think Malcolm Gladwell had a book. I forget the one. I think it was Tipping Point, and he had a term for people like you, and it was the maven. You're the maven in the room. You're the one that can connect the dots and broker interactions. What I want to hit on too is you have an unconventional path. I was sort of reading through, I would call it a resume. It's more of a curriculum vitae, to be candid. And one of the things that was so interesting, and I want to touch on this because a lot of viewers to our show are either new to prop tech or don't understand, all the nuances of real estate, is you started as a photojournalist for USA Today. First of all, how did you become the photojournalist for one of the most prestigious publications, if not just in America, the world? Number one. And then two, how did Steve go from photojournalist at USA Today to now being this maven in real estate, particularly in multifamily and commercial?
Well, the second part is easy. The second part, I went to graduate school in public policy and got some additional skills, which I think is critically important for everyone in their career. The first part of the question is, I really had a lot of joy in college working for the school newspaper, and I was a photographer for the school newspaper. And, it's really my social identity in college was I was especially the sports photographer. As I started to think about having a career, I really said, oh, I really like this photography. Let me see if I can get a summer job in photography. And I found an internship at summer internship at the New York Times for writers. And I wrote in and said, you've obviously made an oversight. You have 8 interns, and you should have at least 1 photojournalist. Instead of 8 writers, you should have 7 writers and 1 photojournalist. And they wrote back the equivalent of, we don't know who the fuck you are, but you can show up with everybody else. and there's going to be housing, and
That's a
we'll
pretty
have.
bold move, Steve. You sold yourself. You sold the position before they even had it.
Well, it just seemed to make sense,
Right.
and
That's bold. That's
just
great. You
because just because they were adults didn't mean that they actually knew what they were doing. And it's a bureaucracy, right? The position was written up by a writer. So what's a writer going to do? They're going to include as many writers as possible. And I just thought this well-funded internship that included housing should include me and prove otherwise. And they agreed. But what it did for me was it created a friend group and let me meet up with all of the vibrant New York press photographers scene over the summer. And I made a bunch of friends and people who looked out for me. So when this job became open at USA Today, I never would have found out about it except one of them said, hey, they've had trouble hiring. 2 people have turned this job down. And again, you're 21 years old, so they can hire you cheap. So, you should apply. And, that's basically what it came down to was, you have a pulse. I have a pulse. And I was willing to accept their lowball offer to take this job. But what it did was it gave me an opportunity to be in that environment every day and to have the training and the mentorship and the prestige of the organization behind me and give me a chance to, have the confidence of learning to go talk to people all over the world and go, look, I've got an hour with you. I'm here to take a picture of you. And it turns out that it's no different from sales training. And I walk in somewhere, it was like cold calling. I walk in and I have a little piece of paper and say, meet the CEO of Bear Stearns Investment Bank. I go, okay, I don't know what that is. And I'd walk in and there would be 500 guys on a trading floor. And Ace Greenberg is like, what do you want, kid? I'm like, well, I'm here to take your picture. Who authorized this? Well, so and so did, but since I'm already here, can we just go ahead and do it, and I'll make you look good, and you can tell me some stories while I set up. And it was great training for dealing with people. So when I went to graduate school, like I thought this is great. I get to have a vacation in school and they're going to teach me accounting and public policy and finance. I've already had this sales training and I was 26 years old starting. And so it was pretty easy to transition to real estate from that.
A recurring theme that I've noticed in your career, which I feel like a lot of people can learn from, is you take the chance and you're willing to learn, right? I feel like that's, I wouldn't say a diminishing quality, but something that we don't teach enough to, our children. I try to instill that in my kids, right? But making sure that you leap into a job, not thinking that you know everything, but that you're eager to learn. I think that's like a really important facet that you've mentioned twice already, right? Be hungry, be willing to take that chance. Yeah, you might work a little cheaper, like you said. Sound like as long as you're a sponge, you can grow a career into what you become today.
I think it's critically important because, school gets you so far, but part of what we have to do in life is respond to where we are. And I've had moments of clarity about doing things like investing and taking public speaking training. I took a class, I think it was at NYU when I worked for the state of New York. And everyone said, why would you take your time? I said, well, they have a tuition reimbursement program. So I'm going to take this class. I'm going to learn public speaking. And it was probably the second largest professional intervention I've ever made for myself. I had people say, how are you sure they're going to reimburse you? That doesn't seem like it's, and I think I had to sell my boss on putting it in for reimbursement. I don't know. I have no idea how much it was, $1,200, but the payback has been enormous. And I think that too many times people wait for someone to invest in them. I just recently had a friend of mine who it's not in multifamily, but he said, for the cost of going to state college, the $2,200, he didn't want to invest it. So I looked to community college, had the same course, and it's $40. You really have no financial reason not to invest in yourself. You can get the same training, but you do need to get up at 8 in the morning and go meet a bunch of strangers. But I promise the payoff will be great. But he didn't do it. It's very common. So in our industry, the thing that I coached someone yesterday, I do every day, practically, if you're in operations and you have not taken accounting and you have not taken finance and you haven't taken real estate underwriting, you haven't really invested in your career because this is a capital-based industry and the capital believes that the industry is the money. we can look at people who've invested in their training and look at the outsized return. So at NMHC, you and I were both at NMHC this
Mhm.
past week.
Yep.
I had dinner with Lisa Trapp, who's the president of Coit Financial. I met Lisa when she was the director of marketing at Sequoia. Okay. But while she was there, she learned real estate underwriting. She learned about brokerage. She learned about investments. She learned about the allocation of capital. That gave her the ability to take on successive roles, to be the COO, I think, at CWS, and now to take over a big family office with 15,000 units. And 15 years ago, she was a director of marketing. I think that kind of career mobility should speak to a lot of people, but it's all about specific training. It's not hope. It's not wishing. It's not friends. Acquire new skills and put them to work, helping other people do more with their money. And that I think is one of the things that I really picked up early on, seeing, some of the people in this business, some of the stories people would say, I mean, it was the equivalent of stuff out of a Hallmark movie. Guy would be like, well, I was a paper boy. And on my route, there was this kindly old gentleman who bought 2 family houses. And then he showed me one day how, and I go, seriously? Like, yeah, but someone had to teach you. And today we live in an age where there's education available, certification available, city college, state college, online, ULI, NAA, and most people don't take advantage of it. I mean, look at you. You've been promoted 4 times in the last 10 years. Why is
Yeah.
that?
I, I mean, to your point, actually, one of the things I always respect with any of my reports, right? Anyone in the company that comes up to me, and this is a pro tip for anyone out there, if they ask for training, that's like a +1. I've never refused a request. I refused one because it was so high, like investment wise. But other than that, I've always been like, wow, absolutely. I've never refused a request of someone to take a course. And I feel like I wish more people knew that. Yes, we can offer it, but take your chance. There's no harm in asking. And if anything, at least I'll know that you want to level up your own career. To your second point, kind of a similar story point, you mentioned something that I had that sort of moment. There was a point where I told myself I need to level up and go to grad school. I hit a point in my previous career. It was 2008. So I'm dating myself a little bit, right? And the financial crisis happened. And I remember I was reading a book, I think it was Rise of the Quants, and it talked about quantitative analysis because I was so fascinated. I was like, how can this financial instrument take down a whole economy,
Right.
global economy? I started reading this book on CDOs and tranches and all that stuff. And I go, oh my God, I know nothing. And by the way, my background is not in finance. So I said, I have to learn finance. I still have to take real estate underwriting. I took that, I took that note too, but I remember that was my moment where I'm like, oh my God, I have to level up. What was that moment for Steve?
Oh, it was easy. I was walking around the halls at USA Today,
Mhm.
and the managing director, my office was in New York and the headquarters was in DC. So the people in DC didn't really know me. The managing director saw me and said, hey, you, photo squirrel. And I said, what the fuck? Did he just call me a photo squirrel? And about 2 weeks later, I was photographing Richard Parsons, who was at the time CEO of Coca-Cola's bottling in New York, and ended up being CEO of Time Warner. And I was in Parsons' office to photograph, and he looks up and goes, you can do much more with your life than this. I go, yeah, some guy just called me a photo squirrel.
He told you that.
Oh yeah, just looked right up and told me that. I said, this is. So then a couple of days later, I get a call from one of my good buddies from college, one of my drinking buddies, and he goes, hey, dude, I'm letting you know, I'm leaving New York. I'm going off to graduate school. And I just go, graduate school? You're not that bright. How are you going to graduate school? And I'm not going to graduate school. He's a very bright guy. He ended up
Yeah.
getting a PhD
Yep.
at Northwestern, so he's a very bright guy. But I said, but isn't grad school expensive? He said, no, dude, it's a scam. If you're going to go to business school or law school, you have to pay. All other graduate school is free. I go, free? So I go down to the library and get this book on financing graduate school. The book's this thick and it lists all the scholarship programs. So I go through this and I'm just looking for free schools that sound interesting. Dentistry in Louisiana? No, no, no. Public policy at Princeton? Yeah, I could do that. Applied there and applied to a couple other schools. I've always been interested in public process and and development. So I said, I'll apply. It's free. But it was just out of these people saying this pointed thing 3 years into being at this job, being open to, there probably is something more out there for me, and I'm having a lot of fun. But there might be other challenges and, other opportunities to solve problems for people. So I can't say it was positively inspired, but it worked out.
What did you learn about yourself when you made that shift from photojournalism to real estate? And I guess the second point is, what similarities and radical differences are there in those two functions that you did in photojournalism versus real estate? I think one that you sort of kind of highlighted earlier is that regardless of of career, you were always somewhat of this broker maven. Like you could connect those people. I'm just curious if you've noticed any other similarities or differences that kind of stand out between those two varied careers.
I think that for me, the unifying theme is that I'm a visual problem solver. So whether I'm solving a photography problem or trying to solve an investment problem, if you're talking to me and say, hey, we have this strategy problem, you'll see me look off and I arrange the pieces in my mind and go, well, your strategy is unbalanced. And so that's the way I solve problems. And so that's the unifying theme. And I think it's probably, related to some form of dyslexia.
Are you a big whiteboarder? Like, do you like drawing on whiteboards and problem solving that way?
No, because it's two-dimensional. I like a three-dimensional space.
Got it.
What did I learn about myself? Actually, I'll tell you honestly, I learned that even though we have access to a method for making large quantities of money, I'm not driven by, I'm not inherently interested in it past driving a Lexus. I've got a lot of friends who've done very well. And to me, the sacrifices that many of them make to get it aren't worth it. And it's not interesting. And then the people that you end up feeling safer around also aren't interesting to me.
Same. Actually, that's a recurring theme in a couple of these ops talks. We talked about a couple people that we know we regularly talk about being successful, and you find the common thread to really successful people is that the money is an afterthought. It's just making sure you either win in your space or build something great, and the money comes after. Yeah, lifestyle creep is a thing. Someone approached me and said, "Why don't you get a new Tesla or a new Rivian?" I said, the feature I like the best about my car is it's paid off.
Totally. Oh, exactly. It's,
and I find that more and more people like yourself or that are really successful, it's kind of like, yeah, well, I don't need the nice shiny thing. At one point I had to, Merrick, our founder.
Sure.
He won't mind if I say this. He was driving like it was almost a danger to himself. He's like, it works, gets me to work. I only commute a mile. I said, Merrick, you have to get a new car right now because you're failing your smog test. The mechanic would be like, dude, your tailpipe is about to burst. Like, that's just the kind of guy. Those things don't matter. Like, the new car doesn't matter. It's all about building the company, building a vision. And I find that with a lot of successful people say the same exact thing you do.
I don't know. The older I get, the more pronounced it is. I used to work with a guy named John Nunn, who's a dear friend, a mentor to me. John and I were talking about incentivizing the team at BRE one day, and he said, what do you think incentivizes people? I said, I don't know, money. And he leaned in and goes, listen, Steve, you got to pay attention to me. The people who do the work at these communities consider senior management's focus on money to be a mental illness. And I just never forgot that. I said, that's so true. Because if your focus is on balance and staying healthy and your family, and if you have children, your children, and taking care of your parents, those are the things that are tangible and matter to you. And when you look at all the unbalancing things that people do, grasping for more, if you're privileged to be in a position where it's not affecting you, you go, boy, I'm not sure that that's really for me. And in our industry, we have a whole culture of authenticity where, people who are in it for the money are kind of shunned. it's really transparent, and it comes out when it's the age old story of the over aggressive salesperson coming up to the portfolio owner and saying, you should buy my product. And he goes, slow down, start with your name, where are you from? This isn't just about money. We have a relationship and a community in this industry, and I think that's, for me, one of the things that I've always really enjoyed about multifamily was being included in the community.
No, it really is, and you see the same people, and focusing on the relationship is super important. I think it is different from other industries, right? I've worked in tech before, and it's not the same. It's a long game. I remember the first NMHC I went to. I didn't know the ropes, and I asked an operator. I said, what will it take for us to be seen as a brand name? And he said, stick around. And I kind of laughed, and I was like, that was a weird comment. But I sort of understand now what they meant. They said, hey, we want to make sure that you build those relationships, that you're, are really invested in doing what you do. And I can't thank that person enough. I want to switch gears a little bit. There's not enough time, Steve. We got to have you back on a part 2. You got so
Take
much
all the
to
time you
share.
need. I've got until lunchtime Pacific, so you take your time.
Okay. We know each other from AIM. I think it was AIM 2019. And I briefly met you. I had no idea that you organized the whole thing. I just thought, wow, what a great guy. And I remember your colleague Dennis comes up to me. He goes, you don't know Lefko? I go, who's Lefko? He goes, Steve. I go, no. He goes, that's the guy you were talking to. He started this whole thing. I'm like, it sort of came to that. I was like, oh my God, this guy started something from scratch. There was no AIM, 10, 15 years ago, as far as I know.
Not true. Not
Oh,
true.
there was. Okay. So that's what I want to harp on is tell me how you started AIM.
I got a call from Mike Mueller, the CEO of Realty Data Trust, and AIM, the Apartment Internet Marketing Conference, was his user group meeting.
Like the old forums, like a online user group.
Yeah, but it was in person.
Yeah.
But the thing was Mike had been president of Spring Street, which became Home Store, and Home Store had an advisory council meeting. So this is like 2001, and the Home Store advisory council meeting was this boondoggle at, I don't know, the Big Hyatt in Scottsdale, something like that. And it was fun. Like the first year they gave away monogrammed robes, and we're like, we're rich.
Oh,
we
wow.
got robes.
Wow.
This is unbelievable.
That's nice swag.
And it was like it was a small it was a small group of people getting together outside of the established industry norms, without the structure of NAA, without NMHC. So Mike had this user group meeting modeled after the thing that Home Store had given up. Same hotel, same everything.
Mm-hmm.
He was worried about being able to focus on customers and product and also put on this event. I was probably the 4th person that he approached about taking over this user group meeting. And because I'd started the OpTech conference at NMHC, I figured, there's probably some old timers that will sponsor a conference if I do it because they remember OpTech. Yeah, it didn't make sense for most people. I mean, the fact pattern really fit me because I was comfortable with the content, comfortable with sending email, right? Sending email was still kind of new. It's a valuable way to help people solve some of their problems. And at the time, I was a solo consultant, and I'd had a pretty good run as a solo consultant. But right around this time, all of my programmatic clients were like, hey, we need to cut costs. We can't afford the luxury of buying knowledge from you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like, boy, I'm selling knowledge retail. Maybe if I'll sell it wholesale through a conference, maybe that'll survive. So that was sort of the extent of the thinking.
When you acquired AIM in 2007, how big was the show, people-wise, attendee-wise, and how big is it now? And what would you say were the most important steps to scale it for you and the team?
I think Realty Data Trust had 60 people. I think the last name was about. Think that the growth is a reflection of people wanting to get together and listen to each other and have better outcomes. And those outcomes are business. Some of them are personal/career growth. Some of them are exploration. We've set up a set of rules and a safe place and make it possible for everyone to achieve some goals that leave them better off. Our marketing is uneven at best. I think that for most people, when they're honest with themselves and go, if I'm on the service provider side of the industry, go, yeah, actually we did make some money from going last year. It might have, we had got some relationships kickstarted. We checked back in with the thing that was stalled, and well, I had a chance to sit down together. For us, is the core of the conference experience. And I really believe that if you look around, along this time, I was a partner in RealtyCom Partners, and so I had the experience of selling, and I realized, boy, I'm selling something that's basically it's a virtual service. It's really complex. No one understands it. That's why we have a business. And if I'm standing talking to someone, by the time I get to the point, they get physically uncomfortable and they find a reason to walk away from me. Like a trade show booth probably worked really, really well in the old days. What you sell, what I sold is a complex product where I need to sit down, physically be anchored and listen. I get to say something, then you get to say something. And there are options in what we can do based on your situation. So tell me a little bit about your situation. And the person has to go, okay,
Right.
can I have some water? Let me tell you what's going on.
Right.
And they go, oh, well, then you have a situation I can help, or you don't, or I can refer you to my friend Andre, whatever it is. And so I feel like AIM was probably the first event in multifamily to explicitly recognize the need to have a complex conversation because the technology sale is not like selling paint. And I don't mean to disparage selling paint, which is also complex, but I think, people could adapt the old trade show booth model and then send in some hard charging salespeople to close on a Sherwin-Williams sale. But if you're selling marketing services that have 7 different modules, you can't sell it at a booth with tchotchkes.
Yeah, I send you the tchotchkes and say, all right, well, we'll follow up with you and close you with your credit card.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, that's what I really enjoy about AIM is, well, not only the venue, it's a fantastic venue, but you don't have that traditional setup. It's even the booths, I would say, are sort of very loungy, open, and you facilitate that sit down conversation with your setup. I don't know if a lot of people are aware of that, but it's a really interesting setup where you don't have the badge scanning, you don't have the, all right, here's your number. It's like a sit down lounge where every time I do my lap there, I notice the intentional conversations people have all the time, which is fantastic, which is really needed in prop tech, right? Because a lot of us are selling sophisticated products to an audience which needs to be trained on it, needs to understand it, needs to understand the why, the how. It's not a fungible good a lot of time, right? It's not
That's
something
right.
you just pick up the shelf at Target. It's innovation, which is, a big part of the conference.
And I will say this, going back to career. I mean, I had a year in my career when I was at an investment bank. I was at Prudential Securities in the municipal bond department. It was my first job out of graduate school, and about 6 months into it, they said, "Listen, why don't you start cold calling universities and see if they need to borrow money?" And they gave me a list, and I probably 20 cold calls in, I realized, gosh, I'm selling money. Everyone has money, or at least everyone, around One New York Plaza in New York has money. So what are we doing? And so what I realized maybe by the 30th call was, if I can get these people talking about themselves, they would invite us to come visit. And I realized, it's really difficult to sell people. It's much easier to engage them in conversation and have them take an interest. And as a brand new associate, I knew I had negative value in a meeting, but I'd have these people saying, "Hey, you can bring your boss, but you're coming, right?" I say, "I'm coming. You don't know anything about me." But, but listening is such
Hmm.
an important part of connecting. And I think that we over-index on transactions and numbers and people. Sometimes people will come to us and say, I didn't like your conference this year. I'll go, well, how many conversations did you have? And if they look at me blankly, I go, you can't just walk up to people and hit them with stuff. It just doesn't actually work.
It's the
I,
old parable. God gave you two ears and one mouth for a reason.
I thought you were going to do the one about the two bulls up on the hill. To see that.
No, I don't know that one. I
Oh,
don't know
never
that
mind.
one.
It's not podcast safe. It's not
Okay,
podcast safe.
fair enough. But it's true. I mean, I think one of the things actually, and this dovetails into the next question, but one of the things that I think to your point, listening is key, particularly at these conferences when it goes beyond transactional. It goes back to the relationship conversation we had, which is why what we do is so conversational, consultative. It's complex. You're servicing managers, operators, third party. If you're not in prop tech and you're watching this, there's so many elements to the tech stack on top of the fact that you have regional managers, leasing agents, owner operators. It's a pretty complex space. And I guess since we're already on the topic, this I had later, but I thought it important is, um, what common pitfall or mistake do you typically see vendors or operators making at these shows, right? You mentioned one, which is just being purely transactional, right? That's not going to get you anywhere and not listening. But I'm curious to know too, particularly with technology being adopted in real estate, what mistakes do you notice, or what guidance would you give to anyone in our space that's listening to this about adopting technology, selling technology? What's your take?
I have very specific answers to that. I mean, I think number one is many service providers, many vendors start out thinking that if then, thinking if I do this, then this will result. And they develop maybe a direct linear expectation of business result. They say, hey, I developed this thing and it does this for you. You should buy it.
Right.
And, part of the complexity that you referenced is there's management, there's general partner ownership, there's the
Right.
hold period, financial status of the asset, um, the business plan for the asset. There's so many things that are in the background, in the mind of the asset manager that a vendor doesn't see that is super important to ask upfront. Are you even allowed to do business with me? And I think that's probably one of the biggest things I see with new people. They go, well, and this is literally my pet cringe. People walk into me and go, I have this thing for these multifamilies. I go, oh, uh, you're providing a solution to people who perceive that they have a solution or have a problem.
Yeah.
And even so, it's going to have to be delivered to them in a form that they can handle. So,
Right.
the second biggest thing is just thinking that, well, we developed technology, so people are going to naturally understand how to use it. I'm going to get the number wrong, but a friend of mine was describing at one point how at communities that they managed, they found the leasing agent had 36 open web tabs to do their business, and so we're layering complexity, and I think that's the thing that a lot of times you just don't see coming from a vendor perspective is how many organizations send in bills to this property or to this headquarters, and it's a really fun exercise, and I suggest everyone do it. Ask a friend who has access to the chart of accounts and ask them how many vendors do you guys currently pay, and the answer is 400, 500, 600. Assume many of those things are physical products that don't need explaining, and still you have 30 organizations at any one time who are supposed to be providing customer service, support, education, learning, updates, blah 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 blah. So it was easier in the old days when there were 4 or 5 of those organizations, right? So that's thing one. And I think from the other side, I think oftentimes um, people on the ownership side, or especially in management, are very task focused and very process focused, and not focused on understanding the whole asset or what they're trying to achieve. And I blame a lot of owners for that. A lot of owners don't share the business goals. They don't share the financial performance. They don't make it possible for people to understand, hey, here's where we're going with this and why. And they hide behind, well, we don't want to tell people because we don't want them to understand that we're going to sell the asset. Like, everyone knows you're going to sell the asset at some point. So who's getting who, right? So, but I think, I look at, on the one hand, I look at some of the owners that show up at AIM and go, look, we have a list of things that we're here to find out about. And we're
Mm,
going to split up. I'm going to go sit over in that corner. My colleague's going to go sit over there. And we're going to take a bunch of meetings and learn stuff. Because
mm,
here's our top 5 problems. And if you hear of anyone solving any of these problems, send them our way. That owner leaves a conference experience, super happy because they took stock of and owned their reason for being there. If you're coming kind of for entertainment and you're going, oh, so many people contacted me and why won't they just leave me alone? You're starting in a hole and maybe not taking advantage of the serendipitous person who walks up to you and says, we might not ordinarily be friends, but I think that what we're doing in smart sensors might save you a lot of trouble with your insurance company. And if you're not already kind of tuned into that, you might not take that person seriously, especially if you feel like, oh, I don't want to be approached. So does that answer your question?
yeah, it's a great dovetail into my next question. Actually, it's something that you had referenced too, is talent. So many on-site teams are managing so much, right? In-person interactions, the 400 vendor problem you referenced. And we obviously want to attract talent. When you made the comment about, oh, I met a guy and he owned, 10,000 units. And you're like, what do you mean? Like, many people don't know this is an industry. And there's this sort of nexus where we talk about centralization. I almost feel like sometimes we talk about centralization, but we don't emphasize enough the on-site team talent and retention and attraction of talent. It almost comes at the opposite expense, right? We say centralization to, remove talent. And candidly, like I think it's quite the opposite. I think centralization can lend to talent adoption. And I'm just curious, like, where's the balance, right? Like, how do we centralize tech stack, but also make sure that we are attracting multifamily talent, which is, there's a gap, right? It is very hard for on-site teams to retain talent. We know that I think it was even at AIM last year, it was a talking point, right? There's been multiple talks about it. How do we address that while also curating people to join real estate and prop tech that may not know that's even a career path?
I'm not an expert in this area, but
Yeah.
I think two very disparate things. One is, we have not we are in the early stages of providing professional training for people that like the stability and the career path of real estate and creating opportunities for those people to be found at state universities across the country. I look at efforts like what Project Destined is doing to recruit uh, college trained, college age, first time college grads, people of color, or women into the real estate business.
Mm,
It's an intentional program that revolves around live exercises in the business, delivering trained people. And the, it's it creates an advantage for those people. It creates an opportunity for companies, and it creates purpose for the employees, knowing that, hey, I'm a part of something larger than myself, and here are some of the levers I can pull to advance a career in this space.
right.
And you can get in on the management side, you can get in on investments, you can get in brokerage, you can get in on the debt side, all through this program. And I think that things like that are really helpful because you're not starting from, well, we met this really nice guy at Nordstrom or Starbucks.
Hmm.
And we've said, we pay a little bit more and you don't have to handle food. So come on over and lease some apartments.
Hmm.
I mean, that's the old way, right? And I think the other thing is that the compensation in the industry just isn't keeping pace. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, I turned on the TV last year and found that the head of private equity from KKR, Pete Stavros, is talking about employee equity ownership. One of the things that we do not do is really incentivize operations to participate in the upside being created.
Hmm.
And I think it's, what we have is an outdated model where if you look at the REITs, you look at the ownership groups where they have profit sharing and they provide, some transparency to people on site. Guess what? Their retention's really high.
Right.
I think we're dealing with a little bit of an outdated model where, if we can share in the carried interest with some of the guys on the investment team and guess what? We can set aside a pool for operations too. I think we just need to accept that if you want a good result, it costs. And in every other aspect of running these businesses, we go, we say, what do we say? Nothing's free. You want to bring your dog? It's not free. You can bring your dog, but it's not free. So guess what? Good talent, longevity, stability, they cost. And you can say, hey, we don't have the cash flow. That's fine, but you do have the upside. I think, I think there are opportunities to look at reshaping, what does it mean to be a good owner of this business? How do we share some of this with our employees that drive the success? And I think just we have an old model. The challenge is for smart owners to look at what tech companies are doing. You join a tech company, you're gonna probably get some upside in the company. You have the potential for a bonus, you might get some options, you know, and the opportunity to create what is life-changing wealth for the people who work there is a really big deal. Simply that we're, as an industry, we're not focused on, partly because of the separation between ownership and management, and partly because the few companies uh, that are smart about compensation and lean into it aren't telling everyone else because they have a huge advantage.
100%. The people advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I want to, again, there's so much, but I think we can bring it back to where we began at, which was your photography career. So you've still managed, despite your busy schedule, to manage to take the time to travel and still dip your toes into photography. And I'm going to take a leap. Is the photo behind you one of your photos?
It is. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was going through your gallery before this ops talks, by the way. Steve, you're taking pictures of lions, man. Like, you are traveling the world taking pictures of orcas, lions. I wanted to ask, number one is how do you find the time? And then number two is, have you ever found yourself in any precarious situation with all the photographs that you've taken personally? I mean, I literally was looking at that lion and have to think that Steve has a story of trying to take a picture where things got a little dicey.
Obviously, if things get dicey, it's a failure of preparation. So the unexpected happen. I spend a lot of time with wildlife, and probably the most interesting things that happen are when you're calm and you're not a threat, and you find out that animals have different personalities. I'll give you a simple example. A couple of years ago, I was up camping in a remote part of Alaska in between Katmai National Park and Lake Clark. And it was mating season, June, very hot, 4 hours of night, 20 hours of daylight. Wake up at 4 in the morning inside our electric fence, and there's two bears sleeping about 30 feet away from us. They had chosen the knoll that we were on for the same reason that we did. A little bit elevated, good viewpoint, good drainage. And it wasn't scary, but it was not something that, we'd seen in books either. Like, okay, should we be quiet or can we make coffee? And then a couple hours later, we went for a hike, and the same bears decided to take a nap right next to us. They're probably 15 feet away. And even our guide was like, hey, I actually don't know what we do in this situation. I'm like, probably.
That's great. That's
Uh,
reassuring.
yeah, I mean, I went back to sleep, and someone got a recording of the bears snoring, and I was snoring, and it's really funny. But most of it is preparation, and the things that are uh, maybe more of a concern than animals are the weather, the small plane we're flying in. What happens if we can't get picked up today off the tundra? That stuff is probably more concerning, or just things that that there's no playbook for. One of the things we like to do is we like to swim with killer whales. Well, killer whales are extremely safe to swim with, but they have very high personalities. If you're swimming with them after they've killed something, they'll bring you, and this has happened, they'll bring you a dolphin carcass or a sunfish, and they'll leave it. They'll just put it out there. It's floating, and they
Mhm.
expect you to go and get it. And they'll sit and look at. They'll actually just kind of, what is wrong with you? It's right there. It's your turn. Um, and it kind of this, moment of like, boy, I really wish I could eat raw sunfish, just so
Right.
just so we're vibing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. You
Uh,
mean you didn't? I feel like Steve would make the leap and say, you know what? Let's have some ahi.
if it were tuna, sure,
Right.
okay, but
But not
but
sunfish.
I don't eat dolphin,
Yeah.
and which is the other thing. I mean, polar bears are genuinely. I'll tell you a funny story. Went up in 2017 to go look at polar bears up in Alaska, and you tour by boat, and we're going around the little harbor looking at polar bears. And my friend says to our guide, "Hey, did you ever do walking tours?" He goes, "Oh yeah, we used to do walking tours." And I said, "Well, why'd you stop?" He said, "I tripped over too many polar bears." And we're like, "Is this guy kidding us, or?" He goes, "Oh no, no, they hide really good, and it's cold and it's blowing, and you trip over a polar bear." He goes, "You go woo," and the bear goes woo, and you both run. I go, "You know what? That's for me, that's too much.
Too
I
much.
a polar bear is a human eating predator, and
Right.
I don't want to be in range." But really, most of the stuff that we do is planning is everything, and the animals have no interest in hurting us. And I'll tell you one more thing. Dear departed friend who was one of the first nature guides I ever spent time with in Alaska. And one day we were going to go walk around in bear country looking for bears. And he says, "Hey, do you have a backpack or something?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Okay, I'm gonna put this 44 caliber handgun in there for you." I said, "Dick, what am I going to do with the gun?" He goes, "Oh, if you see a bear and it starts charging you, fire it in the air, and I'll come running with a shotgun and see what I can do." I said, "That's it?" He goes, "Well, I've seen you shoot, and you couldn't hit a charging bear, so don't even try." And I think like that's real. Uh,
That's great.
City boy Steve's not going to hit a charging
No.
bear.
Oh my God, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing those stories. I know, your photography is a passion of yours. I really enjoyed your gallery. I know you're in your gallery, so I know that's a hobby and passion of yours. So thank you for sharing that. Anything you want to share with the audience, whether it's some of the groups you work with? I know we didn't I know you work with Catalyst, an amazing affordable housing entity that supports affordable housing in the Bay Area. Is that correct? Did
That's
I get
right.
that
I
right?
mean,
Oh,
all that stuff's on LinkedIn or whatever. I mean, I don't feel any urgency about sharing that. People have their interests. But I would say that I'm getting to a point in my career where people ask a lot about success. And I think the number one thing that I see young people missing out on is talking directly with someone like we're doing here today, as opposed to talking at someone through social media. We have the greatest business and social gift imaginable in our pockets, a phone, and most people use it for texting and not for calling. And I guess, if I could end on an advice note, it's pick up the phone and practice calling 3 or 4 people a day, because people are more connected to you and will tell you more things that are useful to you than they will over a private message on LinkedIn or Instagram. And I've known plenty of people who have maybe average skills, but they pick up the phone and make a whole career out of picking up the phone and being available by phone and saying hello and providing some emotional support and being heard and listening. And I think it's a lost skill. And we see so many people who come to AIM who go, I don't pick up the phone. I won't talk to people, and go, well, for the next 15 years, people my age won't promote you either because you won't pick up the phone. So eventually you'll get your time and you'll have a bunch of people texting each other. It's the single career advancer that most people can take advantage of right now, and they don't. Pick up the phone.
well, that's it for Ops Talks. Before we land off, anything you want to promote, Steve? I know I'll promote for you AIM. Great trade show. I'm so excited to come this May. Can't wait. Thank you for putting that on, by the way. It's just an incredible opportunity to connect with clients and then I get to see you, of course, face to face. But anything you want to promote?
Well, I will say this. At AIM this year, we are doing something new. We're doing a strategy council for people in the chief operating officer position in multifamily. So it's going to be a small private group, about 40 COOs getting together to spend dinner and the next day talking in private about how they solve some of the real problems in the industry.
Hmm.
And so if you're a COO or head of asset management and would like an invitation, please reach out to me. We'd love to include you in that group.
There you go. I'll send you my note after this. Steve, thanks so much for being with us. I really appreciate you being on here, having your perspective. It's always refreshing to hear your stories and just get your perspective on things. So I really want to thank you deeply from the bottom of my heart for being part of this Ops Talks.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And for me, this is what the value of this industry is. I can call this work. I get to talk to my friend and hopefully make some positive impact and share a story that maybe makes someone laugh and has the same impact for them that it did for me. So I really appreciate you and this opportunity.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. That's this episode's of Ops Talks. I want to thank Steve Lefkovits for joining and hope you guys learned a lot today. It's funny on these talks, I still learn about the people that are on here that I've known for years. So appreciate Steve. That's Ops Talks. See you next time. Thanks again, Steve. Appreciate you, man. Take care.